schedule. So Dave, here you go. And
Right.
Rachel's your timer, and here's
Okay.
your.
That's the clicker here. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Good to be here. Coming down south. Usually do lots of shopping down here, but new venue. Good to meet some new folks as well. Networking is key. I've worked really closely with some Washington folks in the past. Eric Regassa, prior to his retirement, we had a really good communications going on about all the invasives in the Pacific Northwest, and hope to continue that in the future. My expertise is really in Lepidoptera, so moths. I trap my backyard, and I have probably 10 to 12 new species records just from my backyard. If you look, you find it's pretty well the basics to it, but it's a really interesting work. So I'm the survey biologist for Canadian Food Inspection. Yeah, I don't do anything with food. We're the plant health protection organization in Canada. I have a huge area to work with, so British Columbia to Manitoba is my range, and all the plant health surveys that go along with it. But I primarily concentrate on entomology because that's my expertise, and it's big enough in itself with that area to deal with. So here's an update on Japanese beetle we found last year. Give you some perspective on this new pest in Vancouver and where we're at with that. So I know not everybody's familiar with the Japanese beetle, so I do have all the background to it. As the name implies, it was originally found or came from Japan. It was introduced into New Jersey in 1916. It was thought to have arisen there based on a shipment of nursery on iris plants. First intercepted in 1939 in Yarmouth, and usually when things are found and the notifications go out, people start looking, and then if it was found in Niagara, which was really the important areas for crops and stuff, and then in Quebec as well. Since that time, we've had an annual trapping program in Canada. We only trap now in Newfoundland and British Columbia because it's spread to those provinces where it's thought to be a problem. It's not being done in Alberta and the prairies at this point. I'll explain a bit of that in a sec. It is still a quarantine pest in Canada, even though, like I said, it is in the east. And we do have D9615 it's one of our policies to help prevent the spread to uninfested areas. So this is a good program. I was talking with Justin about this. I think iNaturalist is a great program because it gives everybody a chance to submit photos, and you're getting tons and tons of records, regardless of whether it's a pest or not. That'll all be sorted out in the meantime, and it's a great way to figure out distributions. In fact, I have a card back there, a boxwood moth. It was picked up by the general naturalist community before anybody else, so it finds new invasions quickly. This is just a quick snapshot of Japanese beetle. Shows you this big blob in eastern North America and a few satellites here and there. One of the problems with iNaturalist, though, is some of the data quality issues. You got to really look at the photos, which is great to have there. Some are completely not Japanese beetle, but most of them are. And there's also artificial intelligence built into that program that if you take a picture of a beetle, and it is Japanese beetle, it actually suggests that's what it is. So it's pretty powerful. But anyhow, so that's what's happening. This is part of the Japanese beetle harmonization plan for North America that identifies provinces and states as certain categories to determine its infested status. So starting from the east, where we know it's occurred there, started to spread since then. So the dark green is all the fully infested states and provinces. And then in the light green, some of the Midwest states, you're seeing some counties in there that are fully infested, but for the most part, most of the states are uninfested. And then on the West Coast, the orange, all these states are considered Japanese beetle free. And then you have the other colored states, the category 4 there, that it's thought that if Japanese beetle were to arise, it's not likely to perpetuate and spread from those. So there's technically no surveillance going on in that, which is interesting. But that's what they came up with. So Wyoming is a big one in the middle, and then the prairie provinces, and then you got Louisiana and Florida down south. So I don't think anybody's looking. But what you're seeing is this creep. It's a westward creep. It's getting closer and closer to the west. It's likely a matter of time, but the West Coast states are eradicating it where possible. It was eradicated in Utah. Idaho is just about finished. I think they had about 10 beetles or so this year. in their eradication in Boise. Montana has had some ups and downs with no control. It may be climatically related. It's now found in a lot of the cities on the Front Range of the Rockies, Colorado, and so on. A lot of what we predicted about Japanese beetle is not necessarily true. It's thought in Colorado it was only going to live on golf courses that are irrigated in the winter. Well, that's not the case anymore. It seems to, well, biology always seems to find a way. Invasive seems to find a way. Our predictions are never that great, I find. And so we'll see what happens with this one. So here it is. It's about 1 centimeter long. I see somebody's brought some specimens. I was going to bring a few down, but every time I bring stuff down, they send me an agriculture across the border, and I didn't feel like doing that this time, so I left my specimens at home. Only dead, of course. So here it is. It's quite a beautiful insect. It's a metallic green. Unfortunately, there's lots of other metallic green insects, so people think that's what they have. We have a really neat display that shows all the different types of insects that might be confused with Japanese beetle. But I couldn't bring that as well. But anyhow, it's got these bronze metallic wing covers. Like I say, a very nice looking beetle. One of the other pests that we deal with in Vancouver region right now is European brown chafer, which looks identical to that larvae. So it's basically a big, a fairly large C-shaped grub. You pull your grass back, and they stick out like a sore thumb. You get brown in the background with these beautiful, well, not beautiful, white grubs that just stand out. So they're easy to spot. The diagnostics for this is these 6 hair tufts on each side, laterally on the side underneath the wing covers. You can really see that in the bottom picture. That, in combination with the other characters, the metallic green and the bronze wing covers, is guaranteed to be Japanese beetle for identification. There's a number of life stages that you see, similar to most scarabs. A really large egg. One good thing about Japanese beetle, if there is a good thing, is that they have very limited numbers of progenies. They only have about 30 to 60 eggs per female. Compare that to gypsy moth, which is, thousands of eggs per female. It's not a bad situation. That at least the populations will take some time to really go crazy. So you got your 3 instars, your pupa, and your adults. Just some of the beetles that we have now in BC. We got the native, the big scarab beetle that's found in your lawn, the 10-line June beetle, and then the one in the middle there is European brown chafer. It was introduced around 2000 and has spread throughout most of the Metro Vancouver region. And it's almost a bit of benefit for the eradication of Japanese beetle because people are directly seeing its impacts. Everybody has their lawn basically rototilled by animals by this European brown chafer. So when you want to spray for Japanese beetles, it's free spray, no problem. So it's actually a benefit to this one. But Japanese beetle is much worse than even European brown chafer. Here's the larvae side by side. They're very difficult to tell. You have to look at the end of the abdomen. There's a little cetal pattern there for experts. European brown chafer sticks out really quickly. And if you can't see it, it's probably Japanese beetle. There are some other grubs that you got to be aware of, but if there's this little V pattern, that's what you're dealing with. Here's the life history. So essentially you have those stages that live below the soil for most of the year, essentially. And during the summer period, the adult beetles are out feeding on foliage and so on through like June 15th to about October 15th is the time period that we consider the adult beetles be present or likely to be present above ground. So they do feed on the roots, go through the number of stages. When it's cold out, they can go deeper into the soil profile, come back up to the root zone to complete the life cycle. So that's essentially what's happening. The females, after she's mated, will lay a few eggs, go up and feed, mature a little bit more, go lay some more eggs, and complete that cycle throughout the season. Like I said, our first capture of Japanese beetle last year was June 18th. Interestingly enough, Oregon was June 17th. And I always thought there was like a 2-week phenology difference between Oregon and British Columbia, but that was very much synchronized, which was interesting last year. So that's the stage. Why is it so important? Well, it attacks almost everything. So not only do you get that larval killing all your grass and turfs, but the adults feed on everything and they can get really, really high numbers. similar to what you see with spotted lanternfly in terms of number buildup in the east. I'll show a quick shot of that in a sec. So lots of different things. Here's the grasses, tackle a whole bunch of our really important grasses and lawns. Usually you don't get that kind of damage until you have about 10 to 12 larvae per square foot. And then you start to see that. In Vancouver, you see that damage everywhere from European brown chafer. That's how much buildup you're getting there. So you pull it back. There's no roots left, so the grass pulls up nice and easy. That's how the animals get to it, and can be fairly significant in damage. This is what the adults look like in the damage that they cause. It's called skeletonization. They basically feed on all the foliar leaf portions except for the main veins, and so you get this pattern, lace-like. You can get bronzing. They like to attack the tops of trees and work their way down. And then one of the problems is they really like roses. This is their ailanthus for Japanese beetle. And you can see they can tuck themselves in and they can move fairly readily on nursery stock. You know, one beetle can move way deep down in that rose and nobody will even know it's there. Unless they've caused a whole bunch of damage, that's an indicator. This is what we saw in Vancouver. This is on Persicaria. We had no idea. It is part of the Polygonaceae, which is a really important plant that they like to feed on. But again, the flower beds in this area where we found it in David Lamb Park around False Creek in Vancouver had this type of damage. And it was only in those plants that were out in the sun. They really like high heat units and feed in those areas. So they don't like to be in the shade. They like the nice sunny areas. This is the bed where we found actually adult beetles and lots of that skeletonization within this downtown park. So it's very important to our agriculture and horticulture. We want to keep this out. It's going to be a lot of increased costs. There's just, if we weren't eradicating, it'd be a lot of costs in maintaining certification programs and all that, like they do in the East, all followed in that policy I mentioned earlier. But we don't want to get there, so we're undergoing eradication. This is just an example. You know, put out a trap 11:30, 3 o'clock is completely full. There's tons of reports, people just taking beetles and filling buckets full of them. So that's back east. We don't want to get to that stage. So this is what we found in 2017 around David Lamb Park. So this is the city of Vancouver and Stanley Park to the north, the big green section. That little inlet there is called False Creek. And we had a number of, large number of beetle detections in around that park. So here's 2018, what we found. So a little close up. Again, they're fairly contained. You see a high density trapping. That's in an area called the regulated area, the area which we thought beetles were present. There was one to the south there, that red dot, and one farther south that we found last year in Delta. So here's a city park here. Again, there's a couple little parks, lots of heat units. This is all sort of south facing, really good habitat for them. In terms of what we found for numbers, there's your distribution there. Peak flight was around July 16th. You get start anything above 21 degrees Celsius. Sorry, I don't have Fahrenheit conversion. Was really conducive to flight, and that's when you're going to get stuff in traps. So this is a summary of what we found. A total of 1,888 traps were placed in the Lower Mainland. We also have some in the interior and some in Vancouver Island. But we found 8,274 beetles in 98 traps, compared to 958 beetles in 2017. In terms of where it's contained, 94% were in that, or the traps right around that park. So we got kind of lucky at this point that it is a contained population. Most are found within the regulated area. We are concerned about some hitchhikers. Japanese beetles known to do that, and so we do have a trapping network to pick those up and follow that. So this was a really good thing with Invasive Species Council in place. Like, how do you get all these partners? Things are changing in Canada in terms of how we respond. It was always thought that CFIA, anything that's in the regulated pest list, is whole responsibility for eradication. Well, that's not necessarily the case, especially for some insects and species that are present in Canada, but not present in other areas. So this was a joint effort through a number of partners that came together and said, we don't want Japanese beetle in British Columbia. So we implemented eradication based on this call to action meeting that we had. A lot of work went into it, lots of committees, movement control, treatment, communications, everybody saying the same messaging. It was very important, all coordinated by the Invasive Species Council, which was this independent body. It wasn't just one organization. And that was, I think, the power of it. And it's a new model of how we do things, I think, for response to invasives. So this was the regulated area. So to prevent spread out of there, anything all above plants restricted between June 15th and October 15th. That was last year's. Now it's gone to this year. So we've expanded to Stanley Park there just because there was a couple of detections in the work yards, which implies that it was moving on some of the local city staff trucks. We also needed to do boundaries that were very recognizable, but for the most part, 99% of the beetles are within that area, and we have treatments ongoing for that. We had a lot of communications, a lot of products. I brought a few cards at the back, feel free to take, just to get the awareness out there. I think it's important. Another good thing about Japanese beetle, it is fairly showy and recognizable that the public can help in early detection for this. This is just some of the materials. So the city of Vancouver did all the treatments within 200 meters of all fines in all the public lands. The private lands were contracted by the province, who basically did all the private lands and condominiums and all the others. Most of the areas here were city-based parks. There wasn't as much private lands. So we treated with the Celiprin. It's a different formulation. This is Celiprin S than what Oregon is using. They're using a granular formulation, but we didn't have that available in Canada. And this was really the only chemical that we had that was really good for Japanese beetle. We do have Beetle Gone, which is a BT product now that's approved. So we actually have a second chemical in our arsenal, which we'll be using this year. So we had a whole bunch of people. These are all our partners that came together. I can answer a few questions. Unfortunately, I don't have a huge amount of results because the Celiprin we sprayed last year, but it's not till this year's emergence do we find out whether we were successful or not in terms of where the population is. Because it hits the first instar, they're the most susceptible stage. So we'll see what emerges this year. But I can answer any questions regarding Japanese beetle. Yeah.
You probably already answered, but just you mentioned that if temperatures get colder, then they can just go deeper into the ground. So with the colder winter that we had this year, would that affect anything? Or probably too soon to tell, but is there, like, I'm just wondering about temperature tolerances and on the colder end, if that could ever
there
be
may have been a fact. It's difficult to really predict what's going on. Like most insects have antifreeze systems, and it's usually when they're not ready for a cold snap. The fact that this cold snap happened during when they were ready for it, I don't think it will have a huge impact. Having said that, I was bragging to my eastern counterparts that I was mowing my lawn in January, and then it got cold. So there may have been a subset of the population that started to come out of that antifreeze systems that could have been exposed to that. But I doubt it's going to have a huge effect. The chemical is our main ally here.
Have there been successful eradication programs? I guess that's two questions. That's the first one, and the second is we're in Whatcom County here, and on the island, and we have a lot of Canadian visitors coming down. And can these insects hitchhike on cars and trailers and campers and things like that?
Yes, they can hitchhike on those things. It's a random event. There's no ways to prevent it entirely. It's just a beetle happens to land on it, and car drives down the road, and if it's hanging on, it hangs on and gets off wherever. I mean, it's just something that can happen. You ideally want to have the least amount of beetles in the area, such as eradication is important. To prevent that, the more beetles, the more random chances, basically the way I see it. So that can happen. What was the other part of that question again? Okay, so I talked to a lot of people in the East that say Japanese beetle is a very difficult pest to eradicate. It has been eradicated in Utah. There's been some smaller level infestations that's apparently been eradicated in California. So normally we don't see these types of numbers, like the thousands of beetles that end in successful eradication. Oregon, I think, had like 20,000 beetles or so. They had a fairly large one as well in a residential. We're in this West Coast belt, and I think they behave differently than in the East, and especially in Utah, where it's basically a desert surrounding the city environment. So these things really need good moisture environments for egg development. So that egg actually, with the proper moisture in the soil, that egg, once it's laid, will expand and continue to develop. If there's not, it won't. So that's really important. So that, I think there may have been more success in that environment. In this West Coast with large numbers, it's kind of a question mark. We can only hope to do our best here and use the proper science and get everybody involved and go from there. It's no guarantee for Oregon or BC at this point, but we're doing our best to try to keep it out.
As far as successful